What's up, community? It's Pastor Brett with today's daily Bible reading. And today's verse is what I sometimes call a coffee cup verse, right? It's the kind of verse that we Christians love to throw on coffee mugs. We put it up on art and hang it up around our house. Sometimes athletes will put this verse and write it on their shoes. In fact, this, to the best of my memory, this is the very first Bible verse that I memorized of my own accord as probably a third or fourth grader, and but it was not for spiritual reasons, right? Very selfish reasons. It was for basketball. I was not good at basketball. I'm still not that great at basketball, but as a kid, I struggled, and there was no time that was more fear-inducing for me than being at the free throw line. All eyes on me, and I'd have to chuck that ball and see if maybe I get lucky and the ball would go into the hoop. Now, it didn't happen very often, and so I found myself coming to this verse, and I didn't use it as an encouragement or a positive word. It was almost more of an incantation, right? If I say this verse with just enough conviction and passion that I can maybe get God to believe that I believe this verse, then my basketball will go through the hoop and I'll get a free throw. That rarely happened because, of course, I was misunderstanding what this verse is really promising. And I think it will be helpful for us, even though it can be written up on our walls and on our shoes and on our coffee mugs, to make sure that we're listening well to what the promise really is behind this verse. Because I tell you what, is actually a greater promise than to be a genie, right? And to get whatever we want. And it's something greater for us than even being able to make free throws on demand. So let's read together from Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 13. Here, Paul, the apostle, early leader in the church, is writing to the church in Philippi who have been a part of his ministry through their financial support. And so Paul, the early apostle, writes to the church, verse 10. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. And I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. There it is in verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can make this free throw. I can make a solution to this problem I'm having, right? Whatever problem our mind, we might come to in our mind, we often can think of Philippians 4:13 and say, well, if I just believe enough, then I can do it. Even maybe sometimes without practicing my free throw shots, right? That is not what this verse is saying. It actually is a great opportunity for us to demonstrate one of the basic principles for interpreting Scripture, and we could sum it up in three words. Context is king. Right? If we want to understand well what Scripture is saying, what it's addressing, what's going on in the passages that we're reading, we have to read them in context. Now we know that, right? That makes perfect sense to any reader today. We pick up a newspaper and we know from sometimes where we're even reading in the newspaper, if we still pick up a physical newspaper, we know if it's an opinion column, if it's a headline, if it's a classified ad, if it's listed with the funnies and the cartoons in the back. And even sometimes that context of genre can help us understand what we're reading. And so if we read something in the classified ad versus in the opinion column versus in the front page and the news reporting, that helps color how we read and understand what's being said. Well, we need the same kind of thing when we think about how we read Scripture. We don't take a word or a sentence or even a verse out of its original context and just kind of use it for how we think it might be beneficial to us. We have to first understand what was the author's intended meaning to his original audience. Right? Scripture, it was never written to us. It's always for us today, 2,000 years later, but it was not written to us. So part of understanding Scripture is doing some of the hard work of understanding its context. If we want to understand Scripture well, context is king. Here in Philippians chapter 4 then, the broader context of the entire book of Philippians is that it is really a thank you letter that the Apostle Paul sends to the church in Philippi because they have been partners with him in ministry. They have financially supported him in his apostolic, preaching ministry, him as an apostle, traveling, planting churches, preaching the gospel. And so here is this joy-filled letter, this letter that lifts up the treasure of Christ and the goodness of God, and it's really a report back to the church in Philippi. And so here specifically in chapter 4, Paul is talking about their gift to him. And it says he rejoices that they have brought up, that they're concerned for him. I rejoice greatly that you have renewed your concern for me. He said, I know in the past you had concern, but you didn't have an opportunity to give. And now you've given this gift. And more than the gift, Paul is saying, is I just am so thankful that I know you guys are in ministry with me, that you're concerned for me, that you think of me, that you pray for me. He says in these next verses, I don't say this because I have need. I have learned, and this is so important for understanding our context in verse 13. I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. And he begins to rattle off just a little bit of his story, a little bit of how Paul has dealt with circumstances in life. He's had a lot and he's had little. He's gone hungry and he's been fed well. He's been with the shot callers and powerful people of society. And he's been with the down and out of society. But he said the secret to being content, no matter what our circumstances, which are always changing, which are always fluid, we don't want to root our happiness into our circumstances, right? So instead, Paul says, the secret is to realize what we've been given in Jesus. Or to tie this into what Paul says earlier on in the letter, that he understands the all-surpassing wealth of knowing Jesus. And therefore, he can deal with whatever circumstances throw his way, with plenty or when he's in need. If they're able to help him with a financial gift or they're not able in a season to help him with a financial gift. Ultimately, he can do it all. He can be content in all circumstances because of Jesus. And actually what I want you to take away from that, it is a bigger and better promise than the genie in the bottle kind of Philippians 4:13 that I thought of when I was a kid. That I would recite to myself as I was, or kind of speak out as a prayer as I was shooting the free throw. It's not about free throws or projects at work or marital concerns or raising our kids. It's actually a greater promise that no matter what circumstances throw our way, we have a treasure which is greater. We have an anchor which will hold. And that is Jesus. And he gives us strength to seek him and to be grounded no matter the circumstances that life throws our way. CBC, I hope that you know that treasure in Jesus that surpasses all of our circumstances. And I hope and I pray that your life is ever more rooted deeply in him. And that you with Paul can say, I get it now. I see the secret to being content in all things, and it's knowing Jesus first. Guys, have a blessed week, and can't wait to connect real soon.